Hi folks, it's Jen here, your best mate, coming at you for the Scrapbooker's Confetti Box today with a demonstration video on distress embossing glazes. Now it's taken me quite a while to practice and work out how these glazes work, so we'll probably go to a few parallel universes throughout this demonstration, but we'll end up hopefully somewhere that makes sense. Let's hit it. What you're seeing me do here is demo the difference between an embossing powder and an embossing glaze. This one's a powder, it's called Garden Patina. If you've never used an embossing powder or glazes in your life and you don't know what they are, maybe we can just start there. So an embossing powder is basically plastic ground up into a very fine powder that can be applied to a wet and sticky surface, and then it gets heated and it melts and it sets to a glossy finish that's slightly dimensional. You can use it in a myriad of ways, as I came to learn. I went down a big rabbit hole with this stuff. Distress embossing glazes are developed by Tim Holtz, and he has a range of distress embossing powders too. And he's the king of grunge. So any product with his name on it that has distress, the word distress in it, is built for grunge. So they're a little volatile and they act the way they want to, more than the way you want them to. But if you're into mixed media and you're into a bit of mad sciencing, then this one's going to be right up your alley. I'm working with the embossing glaze now on the other side of this tag, and the embossing glazes match with the Distress Ink and Oxide range. This one I think is Salvage Patina. On the left side there is the embossing powder, it's opaque, and on the right side the glaze is translucent. That's all you need to remember. It's hard to know where to start with exploring the ways it can be used, but this is how I was introduced to the glazes. I was making some journal charms for my junk journals and I wanted a way to finish them that was a bit more interesting and exciting. I really love the way the glazes can age the charm and just make it a little more beat up and antique-y and grungy. Loving it. Oh look, I'm just procrastinating at this point because I don't really know how to use it beyond winging it with the charms. But showing you a few of the different colours. Fossilised amber, that's what is that? Prize ribbon maybe? I started making some more of those colour samples to put on top of the tubs because it does actually make it easier to use them. You don't have to keep picking the jar up and looking at what's inside to work out which colour you want, and all the cool kids are doing it. Anyway, moving on, using the rusty hinge embossing glaze here. Oh, you see that little clump in there? I learned that those can develop in humid weather, and we are in New South Wales, Australia, so it is humid every day, all the time, every day, all year round. So you just want to give it a bit of a shake or just push those clumps out. Oh, the other piece of equipment here that might be worthy of note is that tray I'm using. It's by Dress My Craft. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but anyway, it helps just to contain the embossing powder and get it back into the tub. You don't want to waste any of your powder. For my embossing ink here, I'm using the Ranger Emboss It Clear Dabber, but I learned from Tim Holtz's videos that this is actually a bit too juicy to use for best results with the glazes, and what you really want to use is there's also the Emboss It Clear ink pad if you're doing stamping with embossing. and the little distress embossing ink pad and embossing pens, and I would say I use all of these things for different purposes, so they're all useful in their own ways if you're an embossing freak, which I think I might be turning into. Because I only had the clear embosser dabber to work with here, I was just pushing a bit of the juice off onto the paper every time I applied that. It wasn't ideal, but it worked better than having all the juice on the surface. So if you've used this before and you've gone, it's not working and it keeps peeling off, or it has a really slippery feel once you've embossed, that's because there's too much ink on there. It's just too juicy. Look, I'm not going to lie, there's a bit of face palming involved in trying to work out how to balance the ink situation, but you do get used to it the more you use it. So if that does happen to you, I recommend not giving up. Persevere. Yeah, and then have a Bex and a lie down. Here you can see me prepping just a few bits and pieces to play with. Here some small bits of ephemera. I think this is a nice way just to add interest to your bits and pieces. Use up any scraps. Oh, I love that kitty, little kitty. You want to ink your edges in archival, I reckon, before you glaze, because afterwards it doesn't hold as well. And also you want to use archival because once you put that juicy ink on there, any other ink that isn't permanent is going to go smudge. Glaze will accentuate any darks you have in a background, which is really cool, especially if you want to use stamps in the background. I haven't done that in this video, but that's something to play around with too. Some colours are darker and less translucent than others, depending on how much pigment's in them. Just remember too, if you are going to stamp, use a permanent ink or an archival. Then I went on this big hunting, gathering mission with little other bits of ephemera, laser cutouts from 49 and Market, and all sorts of other bits and pieces. I mean, it looks gorgeous. What am I doing here? I'm not going to use any of this stuff. You know what I'm doing, don't you? I'm avoiding doing any kind of big project that requires any real skill. I've got to bite the bullet for my country. So I went down the rabbit hole and watched all of Tim Holt's demos on the embossing glaze, and he makes it look very easy, and yes, very impressive, Tim, I'm very impressed, and I'm going to play with the big boys too now. So here I'm using a transparent texture paste as a substrate instead of the inks for the glazes, and this just taken it to a different level. I've decided to make it a bit easier for myself here and stick to a warmer palette, so I'm going to use some pinks. This is the Kitsch Flamingo glaze. Chucking some of that on. Let's see where this goes. Doing a little sprinkle here with some picked raspberry. Then coming in with some fired brick. Bit exciting, isn't it? Playing with the big boys. Oh, I've gone a bit rogue, coming in with some fossilised amber. Always overly ambitious, that's when I get into trouble, but let's see. So I'm coming in here with a bit of a ladylike tap just to push things around. Oh, I'm showing you the anti-static pad there because I'm pretty sure I forgot to use it. Every time. Who's with me? I've decided here I want to darken up a few bits, so I've come back in with the picked raspberry. So as long as the texture paste is still wet, you can pop the glaze onto it. Now for the exciting bit, pack and heat. This is the exciting bit, isn't it? When you see the powder start to change. It's a little bit different with the texture paste because that is a lot thicker and a lot wetter, and what you find is that it actually does start to bubble, but that is, according to Tim Holtz, desirable because it gets it to really grungify. I hope you can see it melting and changing because it's so cool when it does. I'm coming back in with my embossing pens here to layer up this design and give it a bit more depth and colour. To be honest, I just got a bit carried away. Next, I decided I wanted to try this process again, but on a background. So I had a tag that I'd distressed using the Distress Oxides and Inks. And here I'm actually remembering to use that anti-static pad, which is good. It means that hopefully my embossing powder will go on a little cleaner and not get in spots I don't want it to be. And here again, just playing with that layering process with the pinks and the warm colours and seeing what happens. As you can see, it's a different effect with that dark background behind it, much more muted. But I really like it, and I'm coming back in with that process again of layering the glazes. What I also did here was to bring some embossing powders in. That's a glaze I'm applying there, but I've got a little pink embossing powder off to the side there, and that means I'm going to get some contrast with some bits that are translucent and other bits that are opaque. That's what I'm going for anyway. Building, 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 and you start to see this richness come into the tag. Oh, it's luscious. I just love it. I even ended up using a white embossing powder. I got very brave. So put some highlights in. And then I came back over that with a glaze later on, just to mute it out a little bit, but still have that lightness coming through. So this went on for hours and hours, back and forth, perfecting, refining. I will beat that Tim Holtz. I will beat him. This is where we ended up with this luscious tag. Oh, and of course my brain then went, why stop there? Get out the Distress crayons. And I went round the edge with this peppermint stick, I think that one's called, peppermint something. And it's pearlescent, and it just gave this dramatic edge to it. I was just in love at this point with myself and the whole world. I decided to go back to that white tag and distress into it and see if I could get an interesting background going. Look, the upshot of this, my friends, is I got totally hyper-focused on making this tag and this whole process of the glazes with the texture paste. And so that's what the remainder of this video is. And of course I make a journal at the end because I always seem to. There are still more ways to use the embossing glazes, and if you're interested, I recommend you look up Tim Holtz's videos because they're very informative and he can do a lot more things with it than I can do, and with a lot more expertise. But hopefully you've seen enough that you feel inspired to do some crafting today, or perhaps try the glazes if you haven't before, or get your embossing inks out, do some mixed media. Those of you who are quite practiced in mixed media will probably find this quite intuitive, but for those of you who haven't done much mixed media, and I'm among you, it might be a little hard at first, but it is fun to play with, and I had a ball and I'll absolutely use it again. All right, adios friends, have a most wonderful day.